Whilst we know God from the perfect 14, 13 of them had known him from this queen. The proofs of God upon mankind, God's proof in her they would find. All 14 of God's greatest, perfect, impeccable household have all seen the oneness of God, and of this God we were told. But 13 of these 14 whose knowledge in God is untold know a queen for whom created was every heaven and world. For man, they're the proof of their creator. For them, his proof is Fatima Zahra. Of her there is no other kind. The fires that lit her house when Zahra would deny tyrants, inspire future tragedies for which Fatima laments. Empires see threat in her children and their godly intents. She tires seeing poisoned men, crushed bodies and burning tents. How much she saw in the push of a door. No wonder for her, wonders were made for. The door had 14 behind. Her father yearns to resurrect once for every tear she'd shed, and other Muhammads yearn earlier birth for blood she'd bled. They gather 13, but the first and last are all Muhammad. She'd wither and they'd be there for her, wailing upon her deathbed. How much she had mourned Muhammad's last breath. How many Muhammads mourned her death? From crying they are almost blind. In lights dim, in Fatima's house of sorrow I see hidden Al-Kadhim, making a house of sorrow out of his prison. Beside him he sees his mother wailing from a rib broken. I fathom that she also sees him, and that's why she's heartbroken. Maybe she had built the house of sorrow to mourn the prison that burnt his shadow. Her shadow to his she'd bind. How many of the 13 wish that they were with her on that day? How many of the 13 wish that they were with her on that day, as Ali, watching his house burn, would also watch his world sway? Tragedy from that day of days cannot be taken away. But he'd see her head slapped and recall he'd be struck when he'd pray. He'd see her head slapped and he'd recall that he'd be struck when he'd pray. He'd yearn that fatal strike upon his head 1,000 times, and not her head instead. Two tragedies were aligned, because what a sound the angels heard when they heard Fatima's rib break, and the ground holding her fallen body from sorrow would shake. She is bound to many more broken ribs, and this makes her ache. As horses pound the body of Husaini, and in her heart is an earthquake. The rib of Fatima knows it's the first. It mourns the ribs of the one killed in thirst. The ribs of Husain remind. She's buried. She's buried, but in the depths of the night, and no one knows where. She's buried, but in the depths of the night, and no one knows where. She'd still bleed until her grandson to take revenge would appear. Embodied is her grave's absence by you, O Mahdi, who would disappear. Her cries heed, O Master, and they break your ribs year after year. Her eyes yearn the rise of our 12th Imam. The flag of his mother raised in his palm, their sorrows are intertwined. Because whilst we know God from the perfect 14, 13 of them had known him from this queen. The proofs of God and mankind, the proofs of God on mankind, God's proof in her, they would find God's proof within her, they would find. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.